If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Hello to you wherever you are. Thanks for tuning in. Last week, we talked about the A of the Gates method, which is assess your capacity and your true yes. And I talked a little bit about how we can connect to the yes behind our no and how that can help us say our no from the more expansive energy of a yes. Or as I like to say, we can say no as easily as a joyful yes. And I also briefly mentioned that we can live fully boundaried lives built more around our yes than our no. So I wanted to unpack that a little bit more today. Some people talk about others as having no boundaries, but if you think of boundaries as our resource limits, we all have them. It's just that we manage them a little bit differently. And the various ways that we manage them might look like flimsy fences or spiked walls, or more healthfully, like selective gates. So essentially, we can have dysfunctional boundaries, or we can have functional boundaries, or taken a little bit further, we can have loving boundaries. And then taken even further, we can be fully boundaried. And the best, most enriched, thriving way to be fully boundaried is to create a life based on your yes. And that progression that I mentioned is, I think, somewhat inevitable, that we have to kind of go through those stepping stones. When you live with dysfunctional boundaries and you are continually flip-flopping between flimsy fences and spiked walls, your orientation to your boundaries is all about the no. And it's a matter of not wanting to say no, or saying no too harshly, or being afraid of no being mean. And when you start developing functional boundaries, it really is a lot about connecting to your no, and developing healthy ways to communicate about your limits again. Some common ones are time, energy, attention. Can also be things like money, calories. And it can also tie back into those values and goals, and our limits can be kind of around our interest, our desire. And this is when we can start shifting more into that yes space. So when you are connected to your yes, the example I used last week was if I was in for the night, looking forward to watching a movie, and someone invited me out, being connected to my yes, my no would sound like, no, thank you, I'm good. So it comes off easily and joyfully because I know what I'm a yes to. And when you get further and further connected to your yes, and even committed to all of the things that you are a yes to, the no's just sort of fall away. And again, when it's really easy to say no to things because you're so connected and committed to your yes, sure, you do still have to say no sometimes, but it's so much less of a focus, and you're so much more continually aligning with your yes. And as you do that, your whole life aligns with it. I think it can also be really important to give ourselves permission to prioritize our interests so we can go beyond just, managing the oxygen mask and budgeting our resources to filling our lives up with things that light us up. There's always a trade-off when we, as I mentioned, when we say no, there's something we're a yes to. But when we say yes to something, we're saying no to literally everything else. And some of those things that we're saying no to are important to us. And so it can be challenging sometimes. Yes and no is very binary. And of course, life is not that straightforward. So sometimes we have to practice what I call life triage. And this is when there are several things that you're interested in, invested in, that are important to you, that you care about. And we do have to honor the fact that our resources are limited and sort of prioritize. What are the few things that I really want to be able to do well and show up for and be fully present in and be really effective in and connected to? Because we can't do that if we're spread thin. We can do lots of things to a small degree, or we can do a few things in great depth. And that's a fact of life. I actually one time created a mind map of all of my interests in sort of different categories. And then I started pruning, and I decided that there were some things I was interested in and that I did believe were important, but not as much as the others. And when I saw the ones that were the most important to me, I started realizing that it was a lot, and it was quite enough to fill up my time and energy. And it became a little bit easier to see which ones I needed to sort of let go of. And it didn't mean that they weren't important to me. It just meant that I decided to be okay with letting other actors in the world feed those, and that it didn't have to be me. They say it takes a village. Well, it takes a whole lot of people to make the world go round, and I can certainly be interested in a lot of things, but I don't have to be involved in all of them. And I can send a lot of love and moral support to the people who are involved in them, while I commit to the areas that I am more effective in. Take this, for example. This is my activism. I really want to live in a more loving world. And so I have put a lot of time and energy into empowering my compassion and doing what I can to empower compassion in others. That is how I contribute to the world that I want to live in. And that's just one example, but if you need to borrow my permission until you find your own, you have my permission to prioritize your interests and not have to give your time and energy to interests that are more important to other people than you. And it's okay if you want to stay in and your friends want to go out. They can go out. You can stay in. Maybe you're also someone who, like me, prefers one-on-one interaction than larger social scenes. If someone invites you to a social gathering, you can say, I'm really not into bigger groups, but I would love it if we could maybe do brunch on Sunday. So there's still ways to stay connected without dipping below your capacity. And while you might feel like you have the capacity in that one instance, if you drain that, it's at what expense? Because everything's a trade-off. So Maybe you say yes to the social event and then you're tired the next day and you have to say no to brunch with another friend. These are things we have to consider. And, something I have been coming to terms with as I'm still learning how to be an adult in my 40s is how to approach responsibility without it activating my inner rebel who feels entitled to this childlike sense of freedom that is free from responsibility. But that's not reality. And as it turns out, the reason that kids are free from responsibility is the same reason that they feel so restricted by the rules of the adults, because the adults are the ones taking on that responsibility. So once we step into adulthood and take on responsibilities for ourselves and our lives, we actually do have more freedom to choose how we want to spend our time and energy. But there are still real world constraints of those limitations on our resources. And frankly, there's a part of me that wants to kind of pout about that fact, and maybe it feels like it's not fair, but there's another part of me that sees a beauty in it, because as I've mentioned before, the limitations on our resources, just like the scarcity of diamonds and gold is what makes them precious, our limited resources are really valuable. And even on a larger scale, we are mortal and we are going to die at some point. Our time on this earth is finite. And if it weren't for that truth, life would be less valuable. The fact that we have a finite amount of time on this earth is what makes being alive really precious. So we can approach our limited resources as an opportunity to really get some richness out of this life by managing our resources responsibly. And once we have a little budget session with ourselves and get clear on where our resources are, where their limits are, what's important to us, what is interesting to us, what lights us up, then we can structure our lives in such a way that support our yes. And when we're really energetically connected to what we're a yes to, the no's are easy and they fall away, and more things that are in alignment with our yes come into our lives. And it's this beautiful upward spiral of fulfillment and thriving. So that's all I really had to say today. And thank you again for tuning in. We'll keep this one brief. Next week, my friend will be joining me to talk about the T of the Gates method, which is trust in the other's ability to manage. And I will say now that part of that is dealing with our own inner rescuer and letting other people have their journey. And part of it is also, as we'll discuss next week, learning how to navigate when other people don't really have the greatest tools for handling your no. So if you're not already subscribed, be sure to do that so you don't miss it, and tune in next week. Wherever you are, I send you love and courage. Namaste.